Welcome to the deep dive. Ever wonder how cities, really transform? Today, we're diving into a pretty fascinating historical account of Arad during the Austro-Hungarian monarchy.
Yeah, it's a great source. Forget dusty textbooks for a minute.
Exactly. We're uncovering the surprising story of how this city modernized, literally from the ground up. It reveals some amazing details about daily life and what really powered its economy.
Right. We get this unique window into a city at a real turning point. It's not just about, dates and famous names
It's about understanding the challenges Arad faced.
and the innovative ways they tackled them, sometimes really unexpected ways, from basic stuff like sanitation right up to these grand economic ambitions.
Okay, let's start with something fundamental. What was it actually like living in Arad before all the modern stuff?
Well, our source paints quite a picture.
Especially regarding waste disposal. It wasn't exactly glamorous.
Not at all. We're talking about this whole network of open canals and ditches. You had the Ticoli ditch as a sort of main line.
Fed by smaller ones from all over, like Diak Street, Fabian Street,
Right.
even the main square.
Exactly. And Ferdu Street, Ticoli Square, Luza, St. Istvan. The list goes on. Some were covered, like on Versmarty Street, but many were open. Just imagine the aroma on a hot day.
Ugh. And different areas had different routes, some towards the Murray River.
Yeah, or towards the dead Murray. Others drain via paved canals or unpaved ditches, like in the Sarkad suburb towards the dead Murray again.
And the Guy suburb drained into the dry canal via open ditches too. It sounds like a real patchwork.
It shows a certain, pragmatism in managing water and waste with what they had, but obviously huge drawbacks.
Huge drawbacks, like daily life. Wooden toilets, these charmingly named pestilential pits mentioned in the source.
Charming indeed. And just getting water. Think about it. Water carts.
People lugging buckets from artesian wells or yard wells, even the river itself.
Right, from the Murray or its tributaries. It really makes you appreciate turning on a tap, doesn't it?
It really does, and the health consequences.
Oh, devastating. It's no wonder diseases like cholera, measles, smallpox, scarlet fever spread so fast. Those conditions were, well, perfect for epidemics.
The fact that the last big cholera epidemic was as late as 1872-73, that really hammers home the need for change.
Absolutely desperate need.
So here's where things start looking up. Enter Mayor Salaskula. He came in around 1875.
That's right, 1875 to 1901, he really pushed for modernization, building on earlier ideas from Burris Paul.
And get this, an English connection.
Ah, yes, the entrepreneur F.J. Mayer.
Representing Hughes and Lancaster's companies. And he proposed this comprehensive plan in 1894 for both sewerage and drinking water.
Which is interesting because apparently there was some initial hesitation from the city.
Understandable, maybe. The promised construction time seemed almost too fast.
It highlights that classic tension, doesn't it? Wanting progress but being skeptical about new tech and big promises. But, well, the proposal must have been convincing enough.
And the sewage tech itself was pretty cutting edge for the time. The Schoen pneumatic system.
Yeah, that wasn't just gravity-fed. Sewage collected in these street tanks.
And then forced through the drains using compressed air, all the way to settling ponds outside the city.
Exactly. Compressed air. There were 5 main tanks in these tall ventilation stacks, like 6-8 meters high. Apparently, you can still see a couple of them today.
No way, like opposite Green Street and on Maradi Street. With the original heavy plates, that's amazing.
It's a tangible link to that era, and it was advanced stuff. Arad was one of only 2 cities using it, then the other being Szeged, after their big flood.
So Arad was really quite progressive infrastructure-wise.
It certainly seems so. Those surviving stacks are like monuments to that early innovation.
And it happened incredibly quickly. 30 kilometers of sewers laid in just 2 years.
Finished August 1896. Technical acceptance done.
And within a month, 85 central houses were connected. Though homeowners had to pay for the hookup, right?
Of course. But still, think about that pace. 30 kilometers.
How did that compare to other cities?
Well, it put Arad on par with places like Budapest and Bratislava, which had around 55 kilometers, and it was significantly ahead of Győr, Debrecen, and Kecskemét at that point.
Wow. So much so that a royal chief engineer, Farkas Kalman, came to study Arad's system in 1895.
Yeah, came specifically to see how they were doing it. Speaks volumes, really.
Okay, so sewers sorted. What about clean water? You need that too, right?
Right, and that happened almost simultaneously. The same English company won the bid. They must have offered the best deal.
Started work summer 95.
Yep, and finished by October 1896. Water supply started that November.
And the big improvement was the source. deeper wells.
Exactly. Wells deeper than 40 meters, feeding into over 26 kilometers of underground pipes. Much cleaner, much more reliable than surface water.
Initially just for the city center, though.
Yeah.
Outer districts got public wells.
That's right. Cast iron public wells later on, but the centerpiece was definitely the water tower.
Ah, the Florian Street Water Tower. Iconic. The source mentions potential architects, maybe Yibelislas or Dunn and Watson.
Either way, a major architect. It was a landmark for the Millennium celebration. And functional, of course.
That height was needed for pressure, right? To get water to taller buildings.
Precisely. It apparently last functioned, filling the tank way up in 1956. Incredible longevity.
And its location near the fire station wasn't an accident.
Makes perfect sense. And near the Chapel of St. Florian, though, the original roof there burned down later in 1925.
It's amazing the level of detail. They even had the water tested by Victor Babet himself.
Yes, confirmed it was potable. And the fire chief, Stenka Milos, apparently personally checked that people were using the taps correctly.
Real hands-on management. Now, before all this water and sewage stuff, Arad had gaslighting, didn't it?
It did, way back from 1868. German entrepreneurs set up the gasworks on Fisherman Street.
But those early gas contracts, they kind of held things back, made adopting electricity slower.
It seems that way. It's a classic example, isn't it? Early tech investment sometimes creates a barrier later on. Arad got electric lighting earlier in 1884.
Arad lagged a bit then.
A bit, but they did catch up. Electric street lighting started in 1895.
And by July 1897, incandescent lamps in the city center.
That's right. The source mentions the early setup with wire pillars on roofs.
Later replaced by wooden posts. And the license was held by the Gans factories.
Yeah, and Arad had its own power plant, basically, an electricity supply company on Radna Street, which is now Yuli Menu.
So by World War I, electricity was fairly widespread.
About 100 streets were electrically lit. Electricity reached many homes, though the outlying districts lagged a bit, except for Eredolnu.
Any early adopters mentioned?
The Crucia Alba and Central hotels were among the first, and several schools, too.
Which ones?
The Royal Gymnasium, the Royal State School, now Moise Nikora College, the State Pedagogical School, now Hitchendeel College, and the School of Wood and Metal Processing, now Earl Vleiku College.
So education getting wired up.
Yeah.
And central heating even made an appearance.
Just creeping in. The first instance noted was in 1913 at the Romanian Civil School for Girls.
Okay, so the city's getting physically modernized. Let's shift gears to the economy during this age of dualism.
Right, the period after the 1867 Austro-Hungarian Compromise.
Our source defines economy pretty broadly here. The city's and people's economic situation. And the GDP figures are interesting.
They are. In 1870, Austria was generally richer, but the Tisza-Mare region, including Arad, was definitely developing.
And by 1910, Hungary had closed the gap significantly, and Arad was a key part of that.
Yeah, it shows the economic dynamism within the dual monarchy, though there were always regional differences, of course. The later decline mentioned reflects, well, later historical events.
And the economic policy driving this, reformist liberalism.
Pretty much. The source quotes Trufor Augustin emphasizing support for industry through credit, transport networks, and vocational training. It sounds like a conscious strategy.
A strategy enabled by the compromise itself. Single market, customs union.
Common central bank, free movement of capital and labor, harmonized taxes and tariffs. It created a large, stable economic zone.
The source breaks it into three phases.
Yeah, roughly. First, this pre-1873 boom, the Gründerzeit, where old feudal structures were dismantled, guilds replaced, banking grew, lots of foreign money and railways.
Then a crisis, 1873 to 1880.
Triggered by the Vienna Stock Exchange crash, bankruptcies, bank shares crashing, worsened by that cholera epidemic we mentioned.
Rough times. But then recovery after 1880.
Recovery, yeah, despite challenges like phylloxera hitting vineyards and cheap American grain imports, development picked up again, often with French and German capital. And they introduced the gold crown currency in 1892, steady growth until
the 1913 crisis and then World War I.
Right. But during that growth period, Arad seems to have really thrived. Population growth is a big indicator.
Growing faster than Oradea and Timisoara for a while, until the early 1900s.
Suggests strong economic pull, people moving there for work.
And credit institutions were key. Banks.
Absolutely crucial, providing the capital for industrialization. Lots of foreign capital involved, too, indicating Arad was seen as a good investment.
There's a quote from Zima Tibor suggesting Arad's economic life might have been leading the way in 1910, based on bank stats.
Yeah, the amount in bank vaults, 77.5 million crowns, second only to Zagreb and Budapest in the region, apparently. Quite something.
And if you look at total capitalization, including industry and transport.
Arad was way ahead in 1910, 160 million crowns, compared to like 60 million for Szeged, 81 for Timisoara, 95 for Oradea.
Serious economic muscle. And it was a transport hub. Railways were vital.
Definitely. Involved in big projects like the Arad-Sanad United Railway Company, the largest private one, and the Arda-Podgoria line, one of the first electrified lines. Huge advantage.
Though the source mentions some struggles with the early MARTA buses, and a funny article comparing costs.
Ha! Yeah, the Aradi Kozleni comparing the bus fare, 20 coins, to the horse-drawn tram, 10 coins, and projecting a future tram fare of 40. Early debates about public transport costs.
They had horse-drawn trams from way back 1869.
Yep, routes connecting the station to different parts of town. Electric trams came later, and hilariously, they even used steam locos to tow the old horse trams for a while.
Until 1927.
Wow.
Now that mayor's report from 1893 gives such a granular view of life. Public health is still a worry.
Measles, diphtheria outbreaks, trachoma increasing, hospital stats showing lots of patients, many dying.
And social issues popping up, syphilis mentioned, police expelling servants leading to a shortage. It's a real snapshot.
It really is. It grounds the big economic trends in daily realities. The health data shows struggles continue despite improvements. And the social dynamics? Fascinating.
The demographics, too. More men dying than women, high infant mortality, way more widows than widowers.
But good marriage prospects, apparently. Equal numbers of unmarried men and women.
And quirky facts, 15 twin births, a 96-year-old man, 2 100-year-old women. It makes the numbers feel real.
Exactly. And Arad's population being larger than Timisoara and Oradea then, with many being Herjwadeners immigrants.
From neighboring counties, mostly, showing it was a magnet for people.
Definitely an economic magnet. That term for immigrants is interesting, too. It gives a sense of local identity.
Public safety, mostly petty theft.
479 cases, 86 unsolved. Some servants punished, a few attempted murder-suicides. But fire was a big risk, huge damage reported, only a third covered by insurance.
And a significant military presence. Infantry, hussars.
Yes, the 33rd Infantry in the fortress, another battalion on Kossuth Street, District Command Hussars. Arad was strategically important. They housed officers, treasury horses.
Construction boom is mentioned, too. Lots of new houses.
10 one-story and 85 single-story in the center alone. 167 total, including suburbs in that year.
How did housing compare over time?
Arad had more houses than Oradea Timisoara initially, around 1870, but later Timisoara especially overtook it. Arad had mostly single-story buildings at first, but that changed radically by WWI.
Those still lagged behind Budapest, Oradea, Timisoara in multi-story buildings.
Yes. Szeged modernized rapidly after its floods, but Budapest was way ahead, then Oradea, Timisoara, then Arad and Szeged roughly level on that front, and rent in Arad was apparently quite high.
The report also covers roads, paved, surfaced, water management.
Efforts to control the Murray floods with proper dams. Vorospal had reported drainage issues back in 1872. They even took out a big loan for dikes and used pumps and a steam loco from Numanid to handle sewage discharge during floods.
And social welfare. Need for a bigger poorhouse.
Capacity was only 100. About 1% of the population sought welfare. Lots of orphans, too, over 3,000 under Arad's jurisdiction. The orphanage stats show the turnover.
But despite all this, public administration was efficient. High rate of settling files, even without computers.
Yeah, the example of Varjasi Lajos suggests they were pretty organized. Impressive, really.
Finances, though. Expenses higher than income, municipal tax rising.
From 42% to 51%. Costs went up: schools, kindergarten, Mire regulation, the slaughterhouse, loan interest. By 1910, the situation was tougher. Arad had high city taxes per capita compared to others.
But the wealthy residents were very wealthy.
More so than competitors, it seems. And these virols, the high tax-paying professionals, had a big say in city leadership because they contributed more tax.
Interesting system. But Arad's overall debt was lower than Timisoara and Oradea.
Suggests maybe slightly more cautious financial management overall.
And controversies, of course. The new railway station and cultural palace.
Praised by some, criticized by others for the cost. Varjasi Lajos got flack for overspending. The local paper poked fun at attempts to save money.
Sounds familiar. City politics haven't changed much. They had to get creative to secure a loan.
Ended up omitting unforeseen expenses from the official budget, reassessed taxes as public assets to satisfy Deutsche Bank. Standard financial maneuvering, maybe.
And salaries in 1893. Mayor Varjesi got nearly 9,000 kroners.
Deputy mayor, police chief around 7,600. Civil servants and notaries did better than elsewhere. Chief doctor 5,800, down to policemen around 2,900, teachers 3,060. Gives you a sense of the hierarchy.
The regional context is important too. Transylvania booming economically until WWI.
Unprecedented development, says Saksuja Istvan. Railways fueled banking growth. Strong industrial development helped by government policies.
And the Titsamaray area, including Arad, industrialized earlier, focused on food and milling initially.
Yes, that initial focus was strong. The Newman family's distillery is a prime example, starting way back in the 1850s. Then they added a steam mill, later textiles. Arad kept pace with Hungary's overall industrial progress.
So a mix of industries developed. Distilleries, mills, wagon factories, machine factories, smaller workshops.
And a strong craft sector, too. Mayor Varjasi actively tried to attract modern industries with incentives like free land and tax breaks.
But Arad still lagged Timisoara in overall industry by 1910. Despite having the first Hungarian automobile factory.
Yeah, Timisoara seems to have had a broader industrial base by then. Interesting dynamic.
So let's look at the jobs people actually did, the occupational structure compared to other cities.
Right. The source uses statistics, excluding military and pensioners. Szeged stands out as more agricultural, despite its size.
Timisoara had the highest proportion in industry, including crafts and small workshops.
Yes. Arad and Oradea were next. Quite industrialized, too.
What about commerce?
Around 12–15% employed there. Oradea actually overtook Arad by 1910, earning a reputation as a city of commerce.
Banking. Arad third in employees, but leading in capital, as we heard.
Exactly. Transport employed about 13%, including railway workers for both MAVI, state, and the private lines.
Public services, like intellectuals, civil servants, teachers.
Oradea had the highest proportion there. Arad was lower. And then servants and laborers made up about 5–8%.
And the size of businesses mattered, a trend towards larger firms.
Yes, though a small industry was still very important. Arad didn't have massive industrial colonies like Budapest, perhaps, but there was significant growth, from single craftsmen to these industrial barons like the Newmans.
Transylvania generally, according to Eid Akos, had mostly owner-operated enterprises around 1900, few with over 20 employees.
But that category, the larger firms, was growing fastest between 1890 and 1900.
In Arad specifically, small industry dominated in numbers, 92%, but only 29 true factories.
About 1.17% were factories, yeah. But when you compare the number of large companies in 1910, Timisoara led, but Arad was very competitive.
What kinds of large businesses did each city have?
Okay, let's see. Timisoara had big breweries, distilleries, fabric mills, steam mills, match, hat, knitting factories, railway workshops, shoe, tobacco. Quite diverse.
Says Egg.
Locksmiths, gas plant, steam mills, rope making, railway workshop, hemp processing, tobacco. More focused, perhaps.
I know, right?
Straw materials, gas plant, carpentry, machinery, the automobile factory, cranes, steam mills, railway workshops, distillery, the wagon factory,
Oradea.
steam mill, construction, distillery, hat factory. Fewer large ones listed there.
So Timisoara is strong in food and clothing. Arad may be more represented in heavy industry.
Seems that way. The Weitzer wagon factory was huge, among the top 5 nationally. And Marta, the car factory, was the largest nationally at the time, producing cars, buses, trucks. They even won a Budapest-Constantinople race.
And the Newman textile factory, Hungary, employed 2,000 workers by the late 1920s.
Huge employer. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what Arad's industrial future might have looked like without the Treaty of Trianon altering the landscape.
Definitely food for thought. What about the smaller scale? Crafts and trades. The guilds were abolished in 1872.
Replaced by professional associations. By the early 20th century, some old trades were declining. Peelers, certain types of shoemakers, but photographers were busy.
The Chamber of Commerce reports mention locksmiths getting fewer orders. Cutlers mostly just selling ready-made stuff for sharpening.
Yeah, changing markets. Bell makers were adapting. One started making pumps, another still repaired small organs. But mechanics did well thanks to the new electric bells.
Competition was tough, though. Commercial agents hurting local businesses, Austrian competition in textiles.
Always challenges. Carriage makers mostly did repairs, but construction workers generally had jobs, even if pay wasn't great. Furniture factories did well, even exporting.
And an increase in entrepreneurs without employees, managing to compete.
Yes, though Zima Tibor notes they were often dependent on larger companies for materials, which kept prices down. Kind of a precarious independence.
Was there any protection for local industry? Tariffs.
Not really, because of the Austro-Hungarian customs union. State support came mainly through tax exemptions for new businesses, payroll tax breaks, sometimes direct aid. Supplying the common army was another opportunity.
Though the Arad chamber complained about others abusing the system.
Upper Hungarian craftsmen, apparently, and there was that Red Tulip movement briefly, trying to promote domestic industry.
Politically motivated, 1905-06.
Yeah, but the enthusiasm didn't last long.
Despite the industrial focus, Arad was also known as a city of great merchants, famous fairs.
Absolutely. Zima Tibor called it that in 1914. Main exports were grain, seeds, flour, wine, spirits, livestock, wood, furniture. Imports were spices, fashion, handicrafts. The shops on Drassy Square were apparently comparable to Budapest's.
And a hierarchy within the merchants, retail versus wholesale.
Definitely. Retailers were seen as the most civilized, petty bourgeoisie. But larger commercial firms with multiple employees became more important by 1910.
Any notable merchants mentioned?
Andreni and Domini, they built palaces, had national reputations. Ellis Arman in spices and delicatessen held lots of leadership roles. Abler Andor, who worked for Ellis, became secretary of the Merchants Association, bought other shops, joined bank boards, very active.
Shows the social mobility and influence possible through commerce. But huge wealth disparity, too.
Oh, yes. The Neumann barons paid taxes equivalent to 10 teachers' annual salaries, though the source notes a sense of duty among the nobility towards the community.
So this liberal economic system, rapid progress but uneven.
Valued profit, hard work, maybe didn't care much for the losers. It wasn't a welfare state. Some call it savage capitalism.
Dark sides included mass emigration, strikes, lives ruined by crises.
Absolutely. And the working class itself wasn't monolithic. Big differences in wages, housing, consciousness.
Skilled workers could afford a decent life. Two-room apartment, maybe. Wife didn't work. Kids in school.
That was the ideal for many skilled workers, yes. The real elite, like master craftsmen or machinists, might earn more than teachers or lower civil servants.
But tenants, helpers,
Yeah,
much tougher. Rented rooms, wages barely enough.
definitely the hardest situation. Wide wage gaps even within the working class. Skilled workers earned maybe double unskilled. Working hours did fall gradually, though.
Clerks were considered petty bourgeoisie, moderate income.
Yes, and professions like civil servants or MAV railway employees were respected, partly due to pensions. But for lower classes, a much higher chunk of income went just for basic survival.
Okay, let's talk cost of living. What did things actually cost back then, early 20th century?
The Arad Kazloni newspaper described the bustle at the weekly market, gives us some prices.
Bread?
36 coins per kilo, though the trend was towards less nutritious white bread, apparently.
Poultry, a fattened duck, a goose.
Duck was about 5.5 kroner, a goose over 9 kroner. Goose was cheaper in Timisoara, interestingly. 6.5 crowns for 100 in Arad, cheaper than Timisoara, but pricier than Budapest,
Sure.
generally getting more expensive nationally, and in Arad it was 1.65 kroner per kilo. Bacon or smoked lard around 1.9 kroner.
Milk, butter,
Milk, 23 coins a liter. Butter, 3 crowns a kilo.
honey, jam.
Honey and plum jam, both around 2 crowns a kilo. Wait, no, plum jam was cheaper, 72 coins a kilo.
Peppers cheaper in Szeged, coffee cheaper in Budapest.
Yes. Cabbage was 30 coins a kilo. Potatoes were super cheap, only 8 coins a kilo.
Beer, wine.
Beer, 67 coins a liter. Wine varied, maybe 70, 100 coins a liter for basic stuff. Fancier varietal wine from a pharmacy costs 3.5 crowns.
Even cod liver oil prices mentioned. 2 crowns. What about plum brandy? Palinka.
Cheapest in Szeged, 1.37. Most expensive in Timisoara, 2.70. Arad was somewhere in between.
Firewood, important for heating.
Arad was cheaper than Budapest or Timisoara for firewood, 7.50 crowns per cubic meter versus 10 or 9.50.
Now, how did people actually eat? Consumption habits.
Well, Fonagy Zoltan suggests nutrition in the monarchy era was comparable to Western Europe overall. Similar meat intake, but maybe more fat, bread, pasta, less milk.
Any specific numbers for Arad compared to neighbors?
Arad and Timisoara had similar habits. Less beef than Szeged or Oradea, similar amounts of bacon, fat, milk. People ate more beef, poultry, and pork back then compared to modern Hungary, for instance.
Fish, more common in Szeged. Eggs in Oradea.
Seems so. Potatoes were a staple everywhere, like bread for the poor. Fresh fruit consumption was lower than today.
Beer consumption relatively low, even though Timisoara beer went far.
Yeah, maybe Timisoara exported most of it. Wine consumption was higher. Oradea drank more than Arad, surprisingly, given Arad's vineyards. Arad was apparently more lucid regarding plum brandy.
And the overall cost of food.
Kileti Karoli estimated a city resident spent about 122 forints a year on food back then. For context, a teacher might earn 750 plus 240 rent allowance. It gives you a sense of proportion.
There's a quote near the end from Edvi Laszlo from 1884, looking ahead.
Yes, a really forward-looking perspective. He warned Arad needed to keep progressing or risk being overtaken by Szeged or Timisoara.
Saying past glories, like being the watchdog of the Hungarians or the martyrs, weren't enough.
Exactly. He stressed the need for a progressive, sober spirit for future success. A powerful message.
So let's quickly recap the top industrial performers again. These really drove Arad's reputation.
Absolutely. Arad's industrial output was significant, even by Central European standards, driven by that entrepreneurial spirit, capital, modern city management, and skilled workers.
First, the Newman Brothers Distillery and Steam Mill started tiny in 1851.
Just a small distillery founded by Ede, Adolf, and Daniel. Demand was high. They expanded in the 1860s, added the steam mill.
Survived fires, added yeast production.
Rebuilt bigger each time. Won international fair prizes. Even got a visit from Emperor Franz Joseph in 1884 and were ennobled de Vegvar.
They merged with smaller distilleries, bought the Edcheny Mill, innovated with railways, farms, even natural gas lighting from their own borehole.
Real innovators. And they gave back kindergarten, school and guide, contributed to the Children's Hospital. Huge output, too. Around 90,000 hectoliters of alcohol annually by the late 19th century.
And the family continued, getting the Baron title later after starting the Hungarian cotton mill in 1909. The next generation, Francis Newman, was huge in the interwar period.
Expanded the factories, founded the UTA Sports Club and Stadium. Very philanthropic, very popular. For over a century, the Newman name was almost synonymous with Arad's economic, social, even sporting life. A true patron.
Then the Hendel Machinery and Gear Factory, started 1872.
By Hendel Uden Sr., making tools for vineyards. His sons took over, shifted to machine tools, textile machinery, gears, even tram wheels.
Adapted after WWI, too. Made gears for mining elevators.
Yeah, a successful family business that peaked before WWII, eventually nationalized.
And Weiser Johann Wagon and Machine Factory. He opened the Arad branch in 1891. Impressed by an exhibition.
Exactly. He saw the potential. Got help from the 1881 Industrial Aid Act tax breaks for new tech. They shared the market with big players like Gans and Gear.
Became the largest firm in Arad. Huge employer. 1,800 workers.
Yes, growth tied to the railways. Weitzer loved Arad, became a Hungarian citizen. The factory became a symbol of industrial Arad.
Making motor trains, wagons, even locomotives, including for that electric Arad-Podgoria line.
Supplied trains for narrow gauge lines, too. And had a close relationship with the Marta car factory founded nearby.
And Weitzer left money for vocational training. Helped Galam Yusuf, the Ford Model T designer.
That's the story, yes. A real legacy. After the union with Romania, it became Astra SA, absorbing Marta.
Which brings us to Marta, the Magyar Automobile Rezvénytársaság Arad. Short-lived, but unique.
Started negotiations in 1907 with Westinghouse's French subsidiary. Joint stock company formed in 1908.
Municipality helped. Land, tax breaks, bought shares.
Yes, wealthy citizens chipped in too. Factory built quickly, series production started in 1909.
Used Westinghouse engines, Arad-made bodies. Produced buses, coaches, trucks, taxis.
Even double-decker buses. First bus company in historic Hungary was registered in Arad. Later used Austro-Daimler patents for lighter cars. It was the first dedicated car maker in Hungary.
But WWI disrupted it. Machines seized for military production.
Yeah, made aircraft engines. Then after 1921, merged into Astra, the wagon factory. The car making basically stopped.
Though Marta vehicles were apparently still seen in Arad into the 1930s, shame none survived functionally.
A fascinating what-if story in automotive history.
So reflecting on all this, Arad went through this incredible transformation.
Yeah.
From, basic sanitation struggles
To boasting modern utilities, a really dynamic economy driven by industry and trade.
and some genuinely surprising aspects like how pioneering they were with that sewage system or their industrial muscle compared to neighbors.
Absolutely. Arad's story in this era is a really powerful case study of urban and economic development. You see the importance of infrastructure, entrepreneurship, capital, skilled labor, all coming together.
Even the challenges they faced teach us a lot about how growth happens, the complexities involved.
Definitely.
Which leads us to our final thought. Considering Arad's early success, the visionaries involved, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other paths might the city and the whole region have taken if major historical shifts hadn't intervened? What can this deep dive into Arad's past tell us more broadly about the factors that really drive urban and economic progress or hold it back even today? Certainly something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Arad.